I have asked myself countless times why I chose to run. It was as if a storm were forming within me, a whirlwind of fears and prejudices clashing against the command God had given me. I, Jonah, a mere prophet, received a clear call: go to Nineveh and proclaim a message of repentance. But the thought of approaching that cruel city, notorious for its brutality and injustice, filled me with dread. I could hear God's voice echoing in my mind. Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it. For their wickedness has come up before me. Jonah chapter 1, verse 2. Yet, instead of obeying, I chose to flee, boarding a ship bound for Tarshish, far from what had been commanded of me. Nineveh, a city full of corruption and oppression, embodied everything I feared. I did not want to be the bearer of a message of mercy to those who deserved judgment. As the ship swayed on the waves, the truth about my resistance began to take shape. What was at stake was more than my safety. It was God's love and grace for a city that, despite its wickedness, still had a chance to repent. The consequences of my decision were not merely personal. They echoed in every life that could have been touched by the message I was meant to deliver. What I did not realize was that this journey would lead me to a place of profound reflection on who I was and who God truly is. As the wind howled and water crashed against the hull of the ship, I found myself in a state of turmoil. The smell of the sea, mingled with the fear pounding in my chest, created a suffocating atmosphere. Looking at the sailors, I realized they had no idea what was happening. They talked cheerfully, laughing and sharing stories of their travels. Yet, amidst their laughter, I felt that something was about to go terribly wrong. Are you all right, prophet? One of the men asked a burly sailor with a curious gaze. His name was Aram, and he seemed concerned as he noticed how lost in thought I was. Yes, just thinking about home, I lied, trying to hide the truth that consumed me. It wasn't just my home that tormented me, but the mission I had chosen to ignore. As the ship sailed on, the first dark clouds began to form on the horizon. Tension rose. The sailors' conversation shifted, and the cheerful atmosphere faded. Look, one of them shouted, pointing to the sky. A storm is coming. At first, the fog and strong winds seemed like a mere warning from nature. But then, the storm intensified in a terrifying manner. Waves began to rise, and the ship swayed dangerously. The sailors, who had been relaxed moments earlier, were now panicking. We have to do something, Aram exclaimed as he struggled to tie down the sails. This isn't a normal storm. Hearing the desperation in his voice, the truth began to creep into my mind. I knew it was because of me. God was calling me, and I had chosen to ignore him. I recalled Psalm 113:9, verse 7. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? There was no escaping his presence. It's my fault, I murmured to myself, feeling the weight of responsibility. How could I have been so stubborn? I should have gone to Nineveh. The sailors, realizing the storm was supernatural, cast lots to determine the cause of their misfortune. The tension peaked when the lot fell on me. With distrustful eyes, they closed in on me. You are the reason for this, prophet, one of them shouted. What can we do to calm the sea? I knew the answer was painful. The only way to appease God's wrath was by surrendering myself. With a trembling voice, I declared, throw me into the sea, and the storm will calm down. For I know that this great storm has come upon you because of me. Jonah chapter 1 verse 12. Fear and reluctance were written all over their faces, but it was the only solution. Those heavy words echoed in my heart. I had fled from a mission, but now I stood on the brink of the abyss. The decision was made, and the true storm within me began to subside. Even as the waves continued to roar, the sea raged, and each wave felt like an echo of my own disobedience. The gravity of the situation overwhelmed me. I was not just a prophet fleeing from a mission, but now a man carrying the weight of others' lives on my shoulders. The words of Psalm 107 verse 25 began to resound in my mind, for he commands and raises the stormy wind, which lifts up the waves of the sea. I was the storm, the cause of the despair spreading across that deck. Aram, with his calloused hands, struggled to keep the ship steady, but the fury of the waves seemed determined to bring it down at any cost. The sailors, now more than ever, looked at me as if I were the very embodiment of the chaos surrounding them. The tension was palpable, With each passing second, the need for a decision grew more urgent. The internal battle raging in my heart mirrored the external struggle with the sea. "We can't do this," one of them shouted, his eyes filled with fear and frustration. "We can't sacrifice you like this." But the truth was, I knew the only hope for those men's survival lay in my surrender. Guilt and responsibility intertwined within me. "But if I do not surrender, we will all perish," I thought. Recalling Ezekiel, chapter 18, verse 30, "Turn yourselves, and give up your ways and your deeds." With a heavy heart, I faced the sailors. The desperation on their faces reflected what I felt within. This was a dilemma that went beyond fear. It was a choice between saving their lives or continuing to live in rebellion. I had not only disobeyed God, but had also put the lives of innocent men at risk. The weight of this truth made me tremble. "If it is necessary, do as I have said," I declared, my voice trembling. At that moment, I realized the true storm was not just the one raging around us, but the battle within me. The struggle between obedience and defiance was becoming more intense, and I knew the answer was near. Amid the chaos, the words of James chapter 4, verse 17, echoed in my mind. "To him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin." It was a call to action, and I could no longer ignore it. The storm roared with an intensity that seemed determined to swallow everything around it. As the waves crashed against the hull, the pressure in my chest grew. Each shout from the sailors reminded me of the burden I carried. What have I done to deserve this? The question echoed in my mind like a mantra of despair. I had disobeyed God, and now these men were paying the price for my choices. "Jonah," Aram called, his voice nearly lost in the roar of the wind. "We can't just throw you into the sea. There has to be another way." I looked at him, and the frustration in his eyes was clear. The dilemma deepened. He wanted to save his life, and I wanted to save mine. But the truth was, there was no more time. "Whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me." I remembered from Matthew chapter 10, verse 38. The weight of the cross I was meant to carry had become unbearable, and I knew the only way to lighten it was to accept my fate. Two sailors approached me hesitantly as water began flooding the deck. The fear on their faces mirrored my own. I was not just a fugitive. I had become an anchor of despair for those who bore no guilt. The words of Romans chapter 14, verse 12, echoed in my consciousness. "So then, each of us shall give an account of himself to God." How could I be responsible for their lives when I had fled from my own responsibility? "If I am not thrown into the sea, we will all perish," I insisted, my voice trembling. The decision was made, but its weight was almost insurmountable. Fear and anguish intertwined like chains around my heart. In that moment, the storm was not just external. It reflected the internal tempest I was facing. I knew my decision would not be easy, but the thought of being the cause of innocent lives being lost consumed me. How could I live with this? The emotional pressure mounted, and my mind spiraled in the pain I was about to inflict on others. Aram and the sailors exchanged glances, and one of them, tears streaming down his face, murmured, "If this is what you want, then so be it." The sacrifice was imminent, and the realization that I was the storm threatening everyone crystallized in my mind. I needed to confront my own disobedience, even if it meant losing my life. Deep within, a glimmer of hope began to emerge. Maybe, just maybe, this surrender could be the start of something new. I knew there was no turning back. The sea roared like a ferocious beast, and each wave seemed determined to engulf me. Aram approached, hesitant, while the other sailors remained silent, their pale faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. I breathed heavily, and a strange sense of peace began to mingle with the terror consuming me. "Jonah, no," Aram shouted, his voice cutting through the wind. "There has to be another way." But I had already made my decision. I recalled Psalm 51, verse 17. "The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. These, O God, you will not despise." The thought that my sacrifice could somehow restore peace to the ship gave me strength. "Do what you must," I ordered, my voice firm despite the fear within me. I was ready to face the wrath of the sea, the storm I had summoned through my disobedience. With a resolute motion, I stepped away from the deck, moving toward the edge of the ship. The sailors' gazes were a mixture of reluctance and acceptance, and I could feel their emotions intertwining with my own. With arms raised, as if surrendering not only to the sea but to God, I shouted, "Lord, into your hands I commit my spirit." Matthew chapter 16, verse 25, echoed in my mind. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. This was the truth I needed to accept. The sailors, tears streaming down their faces, approached me, and with a collective effort, they cast me into the sea. The impact of the cold water felt like an electric shock that awakened every cell in my body. As I sank, the water's pressure surrounded me, and my heart raced, but an unexpected sense of relief began to fill me. I had made the right choice. On the surface, the sailors watched helplessly as the waves swallowed me. The storm began to calm, and sunlight, once hidden, broke through the dark clouds. Aram, wide-eyed and breathless, looked at the others, realizing the storm had dissipated. "He's gone, but perhaps he saved our lives," he murmured, as the reality of what had just happened began to sink into their hearts. In that moment, hope was reborn among them, like the first light of dawn after a long night of torment. As I sank into the depths of the sea, a calm enveloped me, as if the very essence of the water was embracing me. The pressure of the water seemed to pull not only my body, but also all my worries and fears. The feeling of being free from the weight of disobedience brought me unexpected comfort. I had chosen to sacrifice my life for a greater purpose, and it brought me peace. Suddenly, a mysterious force surrounded me, and I began to rise to the surface. When the sunlight touched my face, I realized the storm had truly passed. The sea was now calm, reflecting the blue sky, and the sailors' voices echoed in the distance. Aram and the others, standing nearby, looked stunned, but gratitude lit up their faces. He's returned," Aram exclaimed, as the shame and regret for my decision mingled with the joy of my survival. The lesson was clear to all of us. For God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown toward his name. Hebrews chapter 6 verse 10. The sacrifice I made had not been in vain. It had restored the peace they thought was lost. Reflecting on everything, I understood that true strength comes from surrendering to God's purpose, even when the cost seems high. I learned that in moments of despair, redemption can be found through faith. "For I know the plans I have for you," declared the Lord in Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 11. And this promise now resonated deeply within me. Aram and the other sailors gathered around me, embracing me as newfound hope filled the air. Each of them had witnessed divine justice in action, a sacrifice that brought salvation. The moral of our journey would become a story of faith and redemption, echoing for generations. In the storms of life, God's love and obedience to his will always prevail.